Do the Dallas Cowboys need to add more weapons around CeeDee Lamb this offseason? All that and more this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast
Locked
Network, your
On.
team every day.
Locked on. Locked on.
Cowboys.
Locked on. Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are discussing the wide receiver position for the Dallas Cowboys, how they performed in 2023, and looking ahead to 2024. And we're going to discuss that they need to add more weapons for Dak Prescott. But I want to start with CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee had a really strong finish to the 2022 season, and then this year was unlike anything we've ever seen before.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the headline here is CeeDee Lamb. I mean, with the season that he had, basically the greatest receiving season a Cowboys receiver has basically ever had. And I think the expectations were high. Coming into this season. There was a lot of pressure on CeeDee. They knew that, we knew that this was all on him. Obviously we went out and traded for Brandin Cooks, but I do think that the whole point of going into the season was we really want to make sure that we're giving CeeDee all the room he needs to grow. And I think early on in the season, there was a certain trepidation to kind of really feed him the way that they ended up kind of feeding him at the rest of the season. Obviously, there was a very famous kind of come to Jesus sort of meeting between CeeDee and the offensive staff after the bye week, and you could tell, right? Like the numbers really kind of reflect that the targeting really increased quite a bit, and CeeDee completely took it on. It wasn't too much for him at all. In fact, he really thrived with all the additional targets. And basically was the engine that drove this Cowboys offense throughout the season. And look, I mean, we can say what we want about the postseason, but that engine drove the Cowboys to having the number one offense in football for long stretches of the season.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but I believe it was from week 7 on. He had like 1,300 receiving yards and double-digit touchdowns. It's like once they figured out, like, hey, you can build your offense around CeeDee and like give him 10 to 12 targets a game, everything took off. And going into this year, we all assumed that CeeDee Lamb was somewhere in the top 10 receivers. I remember ESPN did a poll and they put him at like number 9.
Yep.
I mean, now it's not a question of whether or not he's a top 10 receiver. It's where is he inside the top 5? My question for you in regarding CeeDee Lamb is we're going into year 5 right now. He's gotten better every single year. Where can he improve to make him and the team better? Because listen, I don't really care where you rank him 1, 2, 3. It doesn't really matter. But what can he do specifically to kind of take his game to the next level? Or are we already at the very top of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I mean, like, honestly, when you look above him, it's funny. Like we're always kind of talking about the idea of pushing the envelope and where does the ceiling exist? And, when you're talking about guys like CeeDee Lamb, it's like he looks up and the only people that he sees above him are like, Tyreek Hill and, these guys that are like,
if at all, like, I mean, there's things that CeeDee does better than Tyreek Hill. He doesn't have the same speed, but like game to game consistency,
production wise.
Yeah, he's right there.
Yeah, and that's ultimately where I guess I'm going is that I think it's hard to know where he goes from here because he's kind of at the top right now, right? So it's like anywhere he goes up from here is kind of unprecedented territory, to say the least. So I really do think, obviously a huge portion of this show is going to be about the receivers not named CeeDee Lamb. And I do think that that's probably the answer to our question of how does CeeDee Lamb kind of continue to grow and continue to get better from here. I think you have to find ways to pull attention away from him at this point, and I think, the Cowboys, it's not like the Cowboys completely failed in that front. I mean, they did a good job of going out and getting Cooks. And I think that we're baking the results of CeeDee Lamb's season in with the fact that, that Cooks had a major contribution and was a draw away from him and that sort of thing. But I do think that the kind of way forward to kind of continue to grow from here is even more distraction away from CeeDee Lamb, even more weaponry that can force you to think twice about investing so much in trying to defend CeeDee Lamb.
Mhm.
I think those are going to be the ways that you start to get CeeDee even more looks that are favorable, and that's how he kind of continues to produce at an even higher level.
Yeah, and for me, it's not even about the production. Because I mean, at some point, you can only produce so much, and CeeDee Lamb is kind of at that point of like, this is basically like elite production in any single given year. It's hard to give him more targets than he's already getting, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty hard. I think for me, it's just, and actually, CeeDee Lamb talked about this on the podcast with Micah Parsons. Like, he can't allow himself to get so frustrated and not down in a game, but like stay mentally and be focused. Be focused in the big moments of the game. I think we saw that a little bit in the Green Bay game.
Yeah.
I don't want to say CD was pouting because I think that's a little extreme, but it was clear that he was frustrated. You can't let those frustrations out because it's just bad vibes on the sideline. And I think a lot of the players and a lot of the team felt that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, look, we view the conversation that he had with the coaching staff in the bye week, like that's a positive thing. But I think that there is that is a double-edged sword, right? Having that sort of mentality. I think it's obviously incredible. Like, you want a guy who wants the ball and you want a guy who wants to lobby for the ball. But you're right. Like, I do think that there is an aspect in which you're frustrated with the game plan. You're frustrated with the way that the game is going. And you are the star of the offense, regardless of whether you like the way that the
You need to be
offense
the
is
leader,
running.
right?
You need to continue. You got to keep going. And if you've got problems, you can deal with it afterwards or at halftime or whatever. But yeah, I think that there is a point where, and to be clear, I don't know that had a huge effect on the
That's
outcome
not
of
why
the
they
game.
lost the game.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But I do think I agree with you that I think that, one of the things that you need to kind of be at that top level is elite mentality. And I think that drive and will has never been a CD problem.
No.
CeeDee Lamb problem. But I do think that being able to remain focused through your frustration and that's something that you're right. I think it's something that he could improve on, just kind of in the mentality part of this game.
And just to be clear, I don't think CeeDee Lamb is a diva or a
No.
distraction or anything like that. I mean, in a lot of ways, he's the anti-diva. Like
He really is.
We go like months and months and months without really even hearing him talk. So there's just slight moments like that. And he's really young. He's like 24 years old.
Yeah.
And he's even acknowledged it. Like, he needs to be a better leader. And I think now with him going into year 5, with him being well established in the league, I think you're going to see that. The bigger question is everybody else surrounding CeeDee Lamb. Let's talk about the complementary receivers for the Dallas Cowboys last year and what they could do going forward next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. There's so many different ways to bet on FanDuel. You can bet on your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. I love the futures market. I love that you can go bet on not only who's going to make the playoffs, but you can bet on who's going to be in the play-in game, which conference is going to end up winning the NBA championship, who's going to be the finals MVP. There's so much to bet on right now on FanDuel. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We wanted to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, Lena, let's talk about the complimentary receivers to the Cowboys. I want to start with Michael Gallup, who had a pretty disappointing year. He's fully removed from the injury. Just doesn't look like the same guy out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it feels like the aspect of his game that made him kind of unique or at least special. He just doesn't seem to have the same explosiveness that he did before, and maybe that comes back next year, another year removed. I mean, clearly, it feels like this was he took this injury a lot worse than I think some of these other folks, right? It just doesn't feel like he's come back the same, and maybe another year removed will kind of help that a little bit. I do think that he played better football as the season went on, right? Like near the end of the year. In fact, I think it was the playoff game. He had a pretty decent game, right?
Well, and I wonder how much of it was because he wasn't a full-time player anymore.
Yeah, maybe. But I think either way that the Cowboys, because of his contract, I mean, I don't know that they can wait around on that, and to kind of figure out if previous version of Gallup is coming back. So, yeah, I would say that Gallup is not the biggest disappointment of the season, but one of the disappointments of the offense during the season, that just in a way that you felt like he had a reduced role. If he could just fit into kind of his role, and even just like a step back from where he was in previous seasons with a little bit more health, and he really wasn't even able to do that. So yeah, it's tough.
The Cowboys can save $9.5 million this year if they designate him as a post June 1 cut. Is that even like a discussion? Like, do you just do that and don't think twice?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you how you could talk yourself into anything other than that, right? Like, it's just so much money. You're not getting any kind of results. I mean, he's probably, if you're being honest with yourself, wide receiver 4 on this team. And maybe even like, if given your druthers between him and like throwing a play to Turpin, I'd probably throw in a play to Turpin, So,
and we're going to talk about like how the Cowboys can revamp this wide receiver room. It gets really hard to do it if you keep Gallup not only at his current contract, but it's just one more receiver that doesn't play special teams. You can only really have 5 of these guys active on game day anyways. It makes it really, really hard. Let's talk about Brandin Cooks, because Cooks had a tough start to the season, but by the end of the year, he became kind of the receiver that everybody was hoping the Cowboys would get.
Yeah, it just feels like he was still, not really just him, but the Cowboys offense was still kind of figuring out what was going on with Cooks, right? Like how to do the targeting, how to fold him into the offense, how to make him part of the the group. It just felt like the first month of the season they were kind of topping out at like 4 targets a game, and then when they realized that they could target him more and in a couple of different ways, they found routes that he was comfortable with, and they started using him in a lot of these over routes, he started having a lot of really good success. They started, especially in the red zone. I remember that one play that he scored the touchdown against the Chargers. And I think he ended up scoring that same touchdown on that same play like 2 or 3 other times that season. So, it took the Cowboys offense a little while to find kind of plays that they were comfortable running with him consistently. But once they did, you started to see games where he was able to take on, most games he was getting like 4 or 5 targets, but you definitely saw as the season wore on, there were games where he had 10 and up, upwards of 8 or 9. So, and I think that really suited him, right? And there were times when there was so much attention being put on CeeDee Lamb that you got really favorable matchups for Brandin Cooks, and he was able to kind of shake loose and get some big yards. So the Brandin Cooks experiment worked as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, I agree.
Like it was exactly what we were hoping for. Even if his numbers weren't, yeah, outrageous. Honestly, they're comparable to his last year with Houston. And if you consider the fact that the first month of the season, they're still trying to figure out how to use him a little bit, I think that, you kind of extrapolate out what you got in the last part of the season, and you probably end up with, if you got that the whole season, you probably end up with like an 850-yard season.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that
he was really good in the second half of the year. I mean, he made so many big plays for them down the stretch.
yeah, and so whether you want to look at it as production wise, or X's and O's, or just the attention that he's taken off CeeDee Lamb, I think Brandin Cooks was a resounding success. Not the 1,000-yard, 8-touchdown, kind of wide receiver too that some teams get, but the point really was to take attention away to allow CeeDee to kind of eat in a way that other teams don't have wide receiver ones eat, and that was a resounding success. And a huge part of that was obviously Brandin Cooks' attention.
And this is where it gets really hard for me, because I love Brandin Cooks. I think he's a perfect fit for Dak in a lot of ways. But can he be your number 2 receiver going into 2024? This is year 10 for Brandin Cooks. He turns 31, which isn't old, but he's got a lot of miles on those legs. Now, if the Cowboys were to cut him after June 1st or designate him as a June 1 cut, it would save them $8 million. If they just keep him on the roster, his cap number this year is $10 million, which is actually, it's not a bad number. It's not a bad number at all. But is that too much to be your 3rd receiver?
No, not if if wide receiver 2 is a draft pick, because I think that's where we're going to have to go. This is, if you want more weapons here, the problem is that you can't really go forward. Can't really go backwards to go forward here, if that makes sense. Like, yes. I don't feel like you can cut Brandin Cooks and then go get a Brandin Cooks equivalent plus a better guy than what you've had, right? Like, I think that's just a spending bridge too far, right?
Unless
you draft 2 guys,
Well, you could do that. Unless maybe you spend, hypothetically, your 1st round pick on a receiver, right?
And let's be clear, that's a very attractive option, because there are going to be plenty of very valuable wide receivers at your pick in 27.
And the other thing is, if you do that and you move on from Gallup and Cooks, you would save, what do we say, about $17 million doing that. And then you would need the other guy here, Jalen Tolbert, to really step up into that wide receiver 3 role. Maybe that is how you get cheaper at receiver and still get more explosive. But you have to make that decision probably right away. And
very soon. You
need some luck to happen, like at pick 24. You're going to need a receiver to follow you. It's not guaranteed to happen either.
My brain is still saying that we're picking at 27. I don't know why. I agree. Like, and here's the other thing too, is that like, I think that there's again, with the team building timeline, I just don't see a way that you lose Cooks and then get better than where you were next season.
No, maybe Cooks gives you just such a big floor, or high floor, right?
Exactly. So to me, it's more like you keep Cooks, and you have Jalen Tolbert, and then in the 2nd round you go get, I'm going to say your guy's name again, just because he's a different type of receiver, and the fit makes sense. Malachi Corley, right? You go get a guy like that who adds an extra element to your offense that you didn't have before, right? And then you kind of just use Brandin Cooks as your wide receiver 2/3, and then you kind of cobble together a wide receiver 2 with, whether it's Cooks this week or Corley or Tolbert, and then Turpin thrown in there a little bit. I think that plan makes sense. Again, you could also do what we just talked about, where you go and get a 1st round guy, and then you kind of just hand him the keys whenever he's ready to take over that wide receiver 2 spot. And then you just kind of slowly transition Cooks out of 2 into 3 as your rookie wide receiver kind of continues to grow into the position.
I do want to mention there's some other receivers on this roster who could potentially take a step up in 2024. Maybe that's Jalen Brooks, who actually started to play more as the season went on. Maybe it's Kevontae Turpin, who had a much bigger role this year at receiver in year 2. The Cowboys still have him under contract. Maybe it's one of the other guys that you signed last year as an undrafted free agent, like Jalen Moreno-Cropper. I know is somebody that they like quite a bit. David Durden, who tore his ACL in camp. Maybe he finds his way into the roster. But I got to say, Landon, the idea of the Cowboys drafting a wide receiver high is becoming more and more appealing to me. And I will explain why next. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fastest and the easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All in prices show your total upfront so you know that you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account. Redeem promo code Locked On for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Everydayers. On tomorrow's show, we've got Cody Alexander hopping on the show to discuss Mike Zimmer's defense, what we should expect. I can't wait to talk to Cody. It's going to be so much fun. So make sure you tune in for that. Let's talk about whether or not the Cowboys need more weapons around CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. Landon, here's what I've been thinking. I love Dak. I think Dak's a really good quarterback. He's not in the Patrick Mahomes, probably not in the Josh Allen tier. What we've seen is for these quarterbacks to achieve the success that we're hoping for, you've got to surround them with a lot of weapons. We look at the 49ers with Brock Purdy. That's the greatest skill group or skill position group I've ever seen. Look at Jalen Hurts when he went to the Super Bowl last year with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. I think they've got to have somebody else on this team that could carry their offense. I just wonder, like, we got very fortunate that CeeDee Lamb played all 17 games last year.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. I don't know what this offense would look like if CeeDee went down for a 6-game stretch with a hamstring injury. I think they've got to get somebody else in here who can carry the offense if CeeDee's having a bad game or he's out or whatever.
Yeah, I'm certainly not opposed to getting another wide receiver in here. And look, I do think the other aspect of this that we need to mention, just because we can't mention this group without the other, is the tight end group, right? Like, because, obviously Fergie is, and we'll talk about this group exclusively, but just in kind of context here, Fergie is going to take a good percentage of these targets too. As he starts to ascend to become a target that we want to get the ball to, I think he's going to be a guy that we're going to need to kind of pencil in for an increasingly larger piece of the pie. And I will even throw in, and I know no one wants to hear this, but I think Schoonmaker next year is going to get more targets than he did next year, just because he is a second-round pick. Look, I know a lot of people don't love the way that he played the first year, but he showed you something as a big move guy who can be out there, and he's going to get favorable coverage. So you're going to see him getting a healthier portion of the receiving pie as well. Having said all that, I do think that there is still a need here for another wide receiver. I think, even with playing a lot of two tight end stuff, maybe an increase in that as they try to kind of get the run game established a little bit. I do think that as you just said, what if there's an injury? It wasn't even just Lamb, right? What if Cooks gets hurt? Like, you need to have.
You lost all your speed. And that's one of the things we've been talking about for years is like, they haven't had speed. At least Brandin Cooks has given them some speed. If they lose him, they have none on their offense.
Yeah, how much further can Turpin go, right? Like, because I have to be honest, like I didn't see Turpin getting to where he is currently as a wide receiver. I mean, I thought he had a very surprising year last year as a wide receiver in a positive way.
I still think he's probably a wide receiver 5, right?
Yeah, exactly. Can you rely on that? That's the interesting thing about this group right now is that with Jalen Brooks, with the guys that you also mentioned that are on this roster, with Turpin, the Cowboys have wide receiver 4, 5, and maybe even 6 kind of on the roster already. So you're looking for a very specific type of player in the draft, right? Like one that is good enough that you have to roster them and that you give them targets early on, or someone that is good enough to contribute on offense, but also, like a willing participant in special teams, right?
They don't
In order
need
to be
depth here,
rosterable.
right? They don't need a
Yeah.
wide receiver 4. They need a guy that can come in right away.
Add an element, right? Add
Yes.
an angle to this
Yes.
offense, whether that be the top guy, whether that be like a wide receiver, like a first round wide receiver that you're developing into wide receiver of the future, or just a super high end or a complimentary guy who brings an element to your offense that you don't have, right? Another speed guy, or like I keep saying Corley because he's a yak guy,
Yeah.
another yak guy, right? So
Well, I look at like Detroit, right? They have
Yeah.
Amon-Ra St. Brown. They traded up to get Gibbs, right? They had they drafted Sam Laporta, and then they also traded up, was it 2 years ago, for Jameson Williams to give them
No.
even more speed. They need somebody like that, but just hopefully better than Jameson Williams.
Well, nice shot. Yeah, I do think I agree. Like, I think speed is something that, when you look at the kind of collection of skills that these wide receivers have, speed is the one thing that you feel like you're missing, because CD's not a burner necessarily, right? Like, he's tough to tackle with the ball in his hands, and you wouldn't want to try to have to catch him from behind. But as far as getting deep separation or catching a ball and then just beating all the angles and that sort of thing, that's not necessarily CD's game. So, and with Cooks, it's like he does that, but he's also gonna gonna steep down as he continues to get older. So having someone to kind of offset that a little bit is gonna be helpful.
And I was gonna say his ability to win after the catch has just declined because he's gotten older. Like, we should expect that. The Cowboys need their version of like 2015 Brandin Cooks, or like 2023 Zay Flowers. Like that type of receiver would be perfect with Dak Prescott in this offense.
Yeah, and there's a couple of those guys in this class, So I do think that the Cowboys have some options here, and they don't necessarily need to get that guy in the first round, right? Like they can get a positive contributor with a different kind of angle than what you've got in the wide receiver room already in the second, third round. Like, those guys will be this class, just like a lot of these classes, has a really deep complementary wide receiver group, right? And so there's lots to choose there.
Yeah, you mentioned Malachi Corley. I like Xavier Worthy a lot from Texas.
Right.
He's going to run in the low 4.3s. He might even hit the 4.2s, and he's somebody that you might be able to get at 56. So I get, you don't have to spend a first round pick if you want to try to shoot for the moon and get a Brian Thomas, who does have that speed in round one. I understand it, but yeah, I think you can wait until round 2, round 3 to draft a guy to potentially come out and help right away that can also help when Brandin Cooks leaves, probably in 2025.
Real quick before we go, I do think also that if you're going to be looking for a wide receiver, I would be looking for an extra wide receiver or someone who can play in the X a lot, right? Because that just fits the complement of what you've already got. Even as Brandin Cooks gets older, you could easily transition CD into a Z or a slot role, however you want. I mean, CD can definitely play the X as well. I think the problem is right now on this team with Gallup not performing the way you want, and with Tolbert, still kind of learning, you could easily either get Cooks, a Cooks replacement, or if you wanted to go get a true X receiver, I think either one would fit in the X's and O's scheme wise of this offense, and be able to work around CeeDee Lamb pretty fantastically.
You and I are gonna have to watch maybe some Brian Thomas and AD Mitchell.
I've been watching some Brian Thomas. I'm super impressed with that kid. So yeah, give me the LSU wide receivers for sure.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the YouTube channel. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow with our interview with Cody Alexander.